Greetings and welcome to the 2021 edition of Halloween Horror Stories from The Real Estate Guys, a disfiguring diatribe of rotten real estate deals that went heartbreakingly horrible, yet provide powerful lessons for real estate investors. It's another hair-raising installment today on The Real Estate Guys radio program. Registration is now open for the Real Estate Guys 20th Annual Investor Summit. Imagine spending an entire week with like-minded investors, world-class educators, and real-world professionals. Returning in 2022, the editor of the Gold newsletter, Brian London, international real estate developer Beth Clifford, the author of The Creature from Jekyll Island, G. Edward Griffin, Jim Rohn's 18-year business partner, Kyle Wilson, and the rebel capitalist, George Gammon. And joining us live and in person for his 10th Investor Summit, best-selling author and the Rich Dad advisor for real estate, Ken McElroy. Plus, lots more to be announced. It all begins June 10th, 2022 in beautiful Belize. Visit realestateguysradio.com and click the tab that says Summit to reserve your spot. Go to realestateguysradio.com, click Summit, and make plans to spend a week with the Real Estate Guys, George Gammon, Ken McElroy, and an all-star faculty on the 20th Annual Investor Summit on Sand. Welcome to another annual edition of Halloween Horror Stories. These are case studies of property transactions that have gone terribly wrong, but there's lessons, there's goodies inside. I'm Robert Helms, host of the Real Estate Guys radio show. Joining me as usual, financial strategist, co-host Russell Gray.
Hey, Robert.
This is one of our favorite shows.
It is. It's very fun because, the best lessons in life always come through the hard times. And the beautiful thing about hanging out with people who are experienced, who've been there, done that, is that they have made the mistakes in your stead. And so they paid full price, as we often say, for the lesson, but you can get the lesson for a discount simply by listening carefully to what they say, reenacting the circumstances in your mind, trying to put yourself in their place and understand what they were thinking and what they were feeling, because your feelings dictate to a large degree how you will respond in difficult times. Anybody who's ever tried to do anything challenging under pressure realizes your skill level, your processing level. Blair Singer says when emotions go high, intelligence runs low. So having that dress rehearsal of having listened to how somebody else took on a problem, went through a problem, and survived a problem actually makes you a better decision maker under pressure. And if you're going to play this game at a high level, you're going to be under pressure from time to time.
This is an annual tradition at the Real Estate Guys, and the first couple of years we did Halloween Horror Stories, it was all our mistakes and our problems and our ugly, challenging properties.
Which we're still making, by the way.
Easily so. And the good news is people say, gosh, you guys are good at this. It's because we've made so many mistakes and we've learned from them. Today, all of our guests are real investors out of the real world who are going to share their stories, some of them painful financially, some of them devastating, but all of which have great lessons. To kick off the 2021 edition of Halloween Horror Stories, our first lethal lesson is called The Compounding Trail of Lies. This miserable bit of mayhem comes from a super successful investor with lots of incredible projects under his belt and a great new book. Hey, Dr. Tom Burns, how are you?
I'm great, Robert. How are you?
I'm great too, but it hasn't always been great because with everything good going on, you actually have a Halloween horror story today. Tell us what happened.
Absolutely. So this was a while ago. My partner and I took on a project. In fact, it was so long ago that we took a really well-placed apartment complex and was going to turn it into condos.
Wow.
So folks that know the real estate business know that was quite a while ago.
A condo conversion.
Exactly. And so we had a young person that was kind of running point for us. We've supplied the money and some advice, and off we went. As soon as the money was paid, it started to get really hard to get a hold of our partner. And of course, he was a broker, but there was no broker fees for this deal. That was the arrangement. It was actually in the documents, and we saw the paperwork that said no broker's fee.
Yep.
Okay. So we started having some problems, have trouble getting a hold of him, and I'm actually speaking to somebody about this person. This was a young hotshot, very smart. He was, mid-20s, graduate of a prestigious business school, honors business school, and really had a great presence on the web. And I mentioned him to somebody, and they said, "What's his name?" And I said, "Well, it's so-and-so." And they said, "Hang on for a minute." They bring back a high school yearbook, open it up. It's the high school yearbook of their 19-year-old son, and there's the person that was this mid-20s-year-old graduate. We look deeper into the project and find out had he not only not graduated from this business honors program, he had been tossed out for cheating. He wasn't 25 years old. He was 19 years old.
Wow.
So, we thought we had done our due diligence, but obviously not. And we had all of our money in the deal, and he was running it. So we had a meeting. He brought his father. His father was maybe a bit ethically challenged. But we brought Dad in. We had a meeting, and we said, you gave us the wrong age. You lied, essentially. And Dad said, what does it matter? We're all going to make a lot of money. And we said, well, if you'll lie to your partners, there's a lot of other things you'll do. So without going through the details, we ended up taking over control of the project. Over some time, we had to put some more money in. Over some time, we fixed it up. But what we found out later was he was paying his sister $10,000 a unit for design. He had actually taken a commission on that sale, and it said in our documents, nobody gets a commission. He had sent us over a HUD, the closing statement, and it showed no commission for him. Awesome. Closed the deal. As we were doing our research, I get the paperwork from the title company, and it shows a commission. And I called her up and I said, hey, you sent me a document that showed no commission, and then the one that actually closed had a commission. I said, what happened? She goes, we didn't send it to you. And I said, why not? She said, we were told not to. And I said, who told you not to? And she said, Mr. So-and-so, which was our 25/19-year-old gentleman. So, we left all that. We did that. He has, the interesting part of the story is, revenge does not get you forward. So we just kept moving forward.
Yeah.
We took over the project. He went on to do other things. He's since been raided by the FBI. But we learned a lot of lessons. And the project eventually did well. It's real estate. Real estate can make a bad deal. Time can make a bad real estate deal look good and a good one look great. So this turned out to be a good deal.
Well, and that's a great point, because time is our friend in real estate. But the other thing that happens is when things go bad, we want to get the lesson. So some are obvious, but any of the big takeaways, anything you guys did differently moving forward after that?
2 lessons for this one. One is who you're working with. We instituted paid professional due diligence background checks on people. And, you think that's going overboard, but that might have saved us a lot of heartache. And also, you sometimes think you have a deal where somebody's doing the work and you're putting in the money. That's a great mix if you have things worked out correctly.
Yeah.
He had decision-making ability, and it was our money at risk. So we never have, since that day, have never done a deal where our money's at risk and we don't have the decision-making power. So good lessons. It's worked for us in the future, and it's actually saved us on some potential partnerships that we've not done since then.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate your candor in the story, and the story's not completely written yet, because you're still doing amazing business, more than $400 million in syndication. Continued success to you, my friend.
I appreciate it, Robert. Thank you.
Fear not, it's going to get worse. The next eerie episode is entitled The Bloody Vacation Rental. This ghastly tale comes to us from our good friend, Tim Hubbard. Hey, Tim.
How's it going, Robert?
Well, it's going great. Great to see you. You're, of course, the king of the overnight rentals, and we've had you on the show before, and most of that always goes great. But every now and then, not so much. So before we talk about your overnight rental horror story, take us back to your first investment property, because that's kind of a cool story.
Yeah, sure. So my very, very first investment property ever, just kind of getting my feet wet. I got a call one day, and I was still handling maintenance and all that. And it was a plumbing issue. So we sent the plumber over, and they fixed the problem, in air quotes.
With the air quotes. Fixed,
with the air quotes. And a couple days later, a tenant came home. She was on vacation from one of the adjacent units, and her apartment was pretty much full of water.
Wow.
So the plumber that had come to fix the problem really just busted the plumbing out on the wall, and everything from upstairs was going downstairs.
And she was gone. No one had any idea. She showed up, and boom. Wow. Yep. So this stuff happens. Congratulations on your first rental, to understand that It's not always perfect. Any big lessons from that?
That was a tough one, I guess, because someone wasn't in that property. So I guess the big lesson learned was just working with the tenant that came home to her apartment that was a disaster.
Yeah.
And she was a good tenant. So we wanted to work it out, make sure that we fixed everything. Of course, we paid for whatever we damaged, and in the end actually ended up getting compensation from the plumbing company.
Yeah.
So it all worked out well, but yeah, I think good communication with the tenants goes a long way.
So now you're primarily in the overnight rental business, and folks can go in the archive and hear the shows that we've done together. But in addition to being in that business in multiple markets, usually that's a pretty good thing. I mean, do you teach this stuff to folks, but yet it isn't always perfect? Tell us your Halloween horror story.
This is true. After thousands and thousands of reservations, anything's bound to happen. And we've had quite a few crazy things happen, but I guess one that fits more with the Halloween theme would be I was actually traveling. I think I was in Eastern Europe and like Estonia or something like that. And so the time difference was basically flipped with my team in the States. And I woke up to a bunch of text messages, kind of frantic, from one of my managers. And I remember reading, there's blood everywhere, things along those lines. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And so, I'm trying to call my manager immediately. I finally get through to her, and someone at one of the properties had unfortunately tried to, they slit their wrist or something like that. And they had wandered out front of the property. So they were sitting there, and this was in a small apartment complex. So one of the neighbors luckily saw them, called the police, and the police got there, or the ambulance, I should say. And in the end, everything worked out. They were safe. There was no fatalities or anything like that. So worked out, but a scary moment for sure.
No kidding. And so this is one of the things about short-term rentals is that you don't vet the tenant like you might normally do. You're not sure where they work, any of that kind of stuff. So in this case, thankfully your team was there to handle it. But what were some of the lessons? What are the takeaways from this one?
Having good management. I mean, had the neighbor not already called the ambulance, that would have been the first thing that we would have done. And now, of course, this has been years, but we have cameras on the exteriors of all of our properties. So if we get the slightest alarm of any sort, we can check on these things, and then we can make sure that we're on top of it with very little time.
Well, and that is such a good point, because when you start out, things do happen, and we think we're the Lone Ranger. We're all alone. You used to do it all yourself, and today one of the things you've done a great job of is building up a team, and you got to rely on your team in the good and the bad. Now, if you're interested in short-term rentals, Tim actually has an awesome report that you can get for free by just sending an email to shortterm@realestateguysradio.com. Shortterm@realestateguysradio.com. If you thought about the overnight rental thing and short-term rentals, whether they're vacation rentals, a lot of what Tim does are business rentals, but it's fascinating stuff. Tim, always great to have you on the program.
Yeah, great to be here, Robert. Thank you.
He also does an amazing class, so you can learn this stuff. Do you have a class coming up?
Yeah, actually, we have a virtual event coming up November 13th and 14th. So it'll be a lot of fun. Essentially, everything we go over in the live courses, except for we won't physically be going through some of the properties. So we got a lot of good feedback at the last one last year, and I'm excited for the upcoming one.
We're hearing good things. If you're interested in short-term rentals, you can definitely come on out and go to the training. At the very least, get the report, short-term@realestateguysradio.com. There's our friend Tim Hubbard. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Robert.
Shifting gears a bit, this fearful fable is called The Noteworthy Narrow Escape. It's time for another nightmare. Let's say hello to the amazing Eric Shelley. How are you, sir?
Hello, Robert.
Good to have you on the program. We go way back, but we haven't had you on the show. We're going to soon because you've got an amazing thing you're working on, but this is different than that. Tell us your Halloween horror story.
Well, this is related to a note deal I did a few years back. I was doing a note with a fix and flipper, and we had done probably 70 deals, and one of the deals was dragging on typically my deals went for about 6 months.
6 months, because typically that's enough time for them to do the work that they need to turn around and sell the house.
Correct. So we were doing most of these notes, and they were finishing up in 6 months, and I was getting paid off, and we were redeploying the money.
Yep.
So this one was dragging on for almost a year and a half, and so at that point, I'm starting to ask questions about it, trying to figure out what's going on. So I asked him if he could cash me out, and if not, I'd like him to start paying me some monthly interest.
Because typically with these short-term fix and flip loans, you don't take interest during the time you get all the interest at the end.
No, it's usually a back-end deal.
Yep.
So that's sort of a lesson too. So I started getting interest, and this is dragging on for another year. And this is like no other note deal that I've ever had. They always get done quickly. And so I'm in a discussion with a friend of mine. I find out that he has a note on the same address.
Really?
So when I started looking into it, I found out that this was a lake house property, and it was way out of the area where this particular person works.
Okay.
So he found the deal as a lake house, and so he was intrigued by that, and he thought that would be a really cool deal to do. So it's out of his area. It's on a lake, and I think the reason he ended up doing a second renovation was because those properties are usually sold as furnished properties.
Okay.
So I think the second note was basically to renovate it for the second time because it was on the market for a long time, and they needed to have furniture in it to be able to sell it.
Yeah.
But what I later found out is that typically the properties in this area were in the $300,000 range for ARVs, but all of the houses there had boat and dock access to the lake, and this property had canoe access.
Oh, what do you mean by that?
Well, what happened was there's a dock at the end of the inlet where this house was located, and if there was a boat on that dock, there was no way to get another type of boat in there other than a canoe. So it had a dock, but it couldn't accommodate a boat. So anybody that had a boat would not buy this house, and the ARV on these houses was about $100,000 less than the rest.
Okay.
And so now my flipper has two notes on this, so he's struggling. And I apparently paid off the first note that was behind me, but then my note was still there. So I eventually had a conversation, and we kind of agreed that he would just give me the deed to the house because he just psychologically couldn't sell it for less than what he was trying to get out of it. So as soon as he turned it over, I was able to sell the house in about 6 weeks.
Okay.
And I still made a profit on it. Wasn't nearly what I was hoping for, and my money was tied up for a long time.
But not a terrible ending.
No.
But do share with us some of the big lessons here.
So, yeah, the biggest lesson I got from it was that as I was doing these fix and flip deals, I knew the market that I was working in, and I knew that the range of properties should have been between 80 and 140 ARVs.
Yeah.
And this one was 30% higher than that. It was also out of the normal area that they worked, so they were taking crews further out, and they were also in an area that they didn't understand, and as a result bought a lake property that wasn't really a lake property.
Well, there's a great lesson in that you've got a relationship. You've done a lot of business with this guy,
Right.
but he kind of went outside the margin. One of the clues was the amount of the loan, higher than typical. Now, with these notes, how much information would you typically get about the property? Would you see an appraisal? Would you go visit it?
Well, in the early days, I would do a lot more of due diligence, but we got to the point where, he'd call me up on a Friday and we could take down 3 or 4 houses at an auction.
Yep.
And so I would just wire him the money and everything was fine. So, I mean, the other part of the lesson is, work with people that are good to work with, and then you can come up with a solution that worked out much better than it could have.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, they say all is well that ends well. You made some money, not as much as you wanted, but you got the lesson, and that is valuable too. What you're doing now is absolutely amazing. We're going to get Eric back on the show here in the next months and weeks because he's got an amazing opportunity with some interesting tax benefits. Imagine a way that you could legally write off more than you actually invest. We'll save that thought for another day. Thanks, Eric Shelley, for being with us.
Thank you, Robert.
It's Halloween horror stories, things that go wrong, and the lessons we learn. Today on the Real Estate Guys radio program.
Real Estate Guys listeners, are you tired of losing real estate deals due to financing issues? Have you had enough of waiting on banks, lenders, and investor groups to fund new projects? What if there were a way to eliminate all the hassle and invest in real estate on your own terms? I'm here to tell you there is. Patrick Donahoe here from Paradigm Life. I'm an Investopedia Top 100 Most Influential Financial Advisor, and I recently wrote a best-selling book about the financial strategy that changed my entire investment model, and the one that could change yours. To get a copy of my book for free, and learn how you can maximize your real estate portfolio by acting as your own bank, send an email to mybank@realestateguysradio.com. Don't make another real estate deal without reading my book first. Email mybank@realestateguysradio.com now to get your copy for free.
Hey, ever wished you could go back in time and do some tax planning? Now you can, just like Marty McFly. Lucky for you, a brand new federal law just made this possible with an EQRP to get tax deductions and reduce your taxable income from last year, so you can use that tax savings to invest in real estate, Bitcoin, gold, even your own business. Whether you're a full-time investor, doctor, government employee, even if you have 5 or 50 employees, the EQRP works and is your secret weapon, and now it's retroactive. Hey, I'm Damian Lupo, and we have your solution. By the way, if you got bad advice and used an IRA for an apartment syndication, you are sitting on a U-bit time bomb. But don't worry, there's a solution, the EQRP. EQRP company is ready to help you get control of your money, kill U-bit, and help you pay way less taxes. Want to learn more about this strategy? Send an email to eqrp@realestateguysradio.com for my special EQRP report. Paying tax or letting Wall Street suck you dry is dumb. Your first step is freeing your retirement money by sending an email to eqrp@realestateguysradio.com today.
Welcome back to the Real Estate Guys radio program, heard every weekend on this great radio station all the time at realestateguysradio.com. If you've thought about diversifying internationally, well, come to beautiful Belize. It's our Belize discovery trip the first weekend of December. You'll see a beautiful place and lots of great opportunity. All the details on the website at realestateguysradio.com under events. It's Halloween horror stories, things that have gone wrong in real estate, but the lessons we can learn. Getting back into the creaky cauldron of circumstance, our next bit of blight is called the Misinformed Reluctant Seller. Our next dreadful tale comes from a gentleman making his first appearance on the Real Estate Guys radio program. Let's say hi to our friend Jared Kavanaugh. Hey, Jared.
Hey, how you doing, Robert?
Good to see you. I know things are going well. I'm very excited for your amazing path as a syndicator, but not everything goes amazingly well, which is why you're here in the Halloween horror stories. You've got a doozy. Tell us about it.
Yeah, it does. So we recently acquired 5 mobile home parks in the Georgia, Alabama area. And during the process, everything was kind of going along pretty well. And due diligence was working out fine. And then we started our investor capital raise. And then right as we started that, our bank that we had a long time standing relationship with basically pulled the plug on our loan for the simple reason that they got acquired by a separate bank. So we were left kind of holding the bag with only a few weeks left on the deal to kind of close it before we expired and lost all of our money for due diligence and everything else.
Ouch, that sounds painful, but wait, there's more to the story. So let's just talk about that part for a minute, because this is very common that you go into any kind of a deal, you've got your financing lined up, but things can and do change. And most loan commitments are worth the paper they're written on, right? So what happened and what did you do about it?
Well, we immediately knew that we had to start shopping for another bank, but to start a commercial loan application, I think we had a little over 3 weeks left. We were pretty confident that that wasn't going to be doable. So the first thing we did was went back to the sellers and asked if they would give us a 2 or 3 week extension on the timeline to see if we can go to another bank and get everything done and finalized so that we can close on the property.
And is this one seller that has all these parks, or is it multiple sellers?
Yes, it was a husband and wife couple that are heading into retirement, and they were ready to exit all of their parks. So it was one seller, which made it a little bit easier. But the sellers threw us for a loop, and then they said they had had a change of heart, and they had now decided to keep the properties and didn't want to extend the deadline. So initially they tell us that they're going to keep with the original deadline, and if we can close, okay, but if not, they're going to keep the properties.
Wow. So there's a interesting thing that comes up in this, and we've talked about this offline, which is a little more knowledge of the deal, and that is that we put contingencies in a contract. The common contingencies are things like an inspection contingency or a financing contingency. From the buyer side, your side, you could have a contingency that said if for any reason we don't get funded, hey, no harm, no foul, and you can get out of the deal that way. I recognize you didn't want to get out of the deal, but that's what protects you. And we have a lot of those contingencies. Almost always they favor the buyer. It's super hard in most jurisdictions for the seller to get out of a contract, but they might have a cause here, especially if you guys can't get it funded. So what happened next?
So at that point, this was a new one for me. So we had to go out and basically raise private capital to go ahead and close the loan on a short-term basis while we found a new bank and continued to work through that. So we went out and we had a backup plan put in place through one of our investors that was willing to fund the whole loan for 45 days for a certain fee if we weren't able to close with the bank. And in the meantime, we were still working with the bank. We found another great banking relationship, and we're still working with the bank to try and get it closed inside that 3 weeks. But we knew it'd come down to the last 4 or 5 days where we had to make a call. So we wanted to have that private loan ready to go in case we needed it.
Awesome. We always talk about multiple exit strategies, so that's good, being prepared stuff there. But now you've got the issue with the seller is looking for a reason to get out of it, and that means you've probably got to get some legal help.
Yeah, so initially the seller said, yeah, we'll continue to let you guys work your process, and if you can close in time, we'll let you close. And then the week prior to closing, they actually sent us a letter late in the afternoon and said, hey, we're going to break our contract and we're no longer going to close with you. And their attorney kind of misinformed them and told them that they would be facing a $10,000 fine if they did that, which in reality was not true. So now we had to go down a whole different legal process of possibly preparing for litigation and stuff like that, this was a new experience for me.
Yeah, that's never pleasant. But again, part of it is communication and expectation. So you have the broker on the side of the seller who maybe has some culpability in this, and then you have the attorney giving them advice. So I know when we talked about it, it's like, well, probably best thing to start with a conversation with the seller. Now, of course, represented by agents, you got to tread lightly there. Take us through that part of the process, trying to get to a better answer.
Yeah, so I'm not anti-lawyer, but I don't want lawyers involved in everything. So my first course of action was to go to the sellers and just try to have a heart-to-heart conversation with them and get them to understand where we're coming from. Just kind of inform them that, we've got about $60,000 in this deal already through surveys and inspections and environmental assessments,
travel,
and everything else.
On and on.
Exactly. And so we just let them know that we thought that it was likely that their attorney may have misinformed them and they should go back and talk to him again because our counsel is telling us something different. And we just wanted to get their final assessment if this is the route they were going to go, to which they said, yes, we're going to break the contract. And so then we had to go down that path.
Okay, tell us about that.
So at that point, this was kind of when I had talked to you about it as well and got your counsel, which was amazing. And so at that point, we had to take the advice of our counsel and kind of cease communication, just to protect ourselves if something was to go to court. So we ceased communication with the sellers and worked through the attorneys, let them do their job. My attorney, which is a specialized real estate attorney, that's all she does. She was very knowledgeable in it. She knew the right litigation attorney in the area to call, and so we got advice from them as well. And we were able to basically get a letter out to the sellers, kind of identifying these are all the potential pitfalls that you're going to run into, which could have a high dollar amount to the sellers and a lot of time and effort and emotion. So at that point, the letter went out to the sellers and their counsel, and the letter that she sent did its job and basically got the sellers back to the table once they understood what was at risk for them in the deal. And once they understood that once you're a seller in a deal, it's really hard to break that contract without me violating my end of the contract somehow, to which I hadn't. So,
you never want to go down the legal path, but this is one of the greatest uses for an attorney is when they can help you get to the point that you should be at anyway. And sometimes it's just positioning and so forth. So, Jared, what are the big obvious lessons here? This is going to make you a better, stronger investor because you've been through it. But what are the takeaways? What are your lessons?
I kind of had 3 big lessons. The first one was it was an opportunity to kind of show our investors that we're leading through the crisis, we're dealing with it, and we're going to handle it, which is our job, right? And so that was the first one.
Well, let me stop you there because that's not a small one. Imagine the scenario that I was just going to buy a property in my own account and I'm dealing with this. Well, that's kind of all on me. But because you raise capital for people to, do these kinds of deals, now you've got a bunch of investors who have bought off on the market, they bought off on the property, they bought off on you, they're ready to go, they've transferred money. And the thought of having to go back to them and say, guys, they backed out and here's your money back, that's not pleasant. That's not good for a syndicator's business. So helping them kind of navigate through that, critically important.
Yes, absolutely. And our investors are our number one priority and we don't want to let them down, and we specifically don't want to lose their money. So that was something that we were able to work through with our investors, and I think we did okay on that. And The second one I learned is always have good attorneys that are specialized in their field. The counsel on the seller's side was definitely just more of a general counsel. He did a little bit of everything from business law to real estate law to he even litigated, which is sometimes odd. You usually have your contractual attorneys and transactional attorneys, and then you have your litigation attorneys that actually go to court and fight the fight. So he did kind of everything, and that ended up being a disservice to his clients.
And you, on the other hand, had exactly the specialized attorney you need who knew the law and was able to articulate that in a way that everybody came back to the table.
Yes, correct. Our attorney does specifically real estate transactions, and she's purely a transactional attorney. She doesn't even do litigation, so she is highly specialized and has a lot of experience under her belt.
And another part about this part of the lesson is that the temptation might be to save a little money and get the cheaper attorney or use my friend the attorney. You always want to get the right person that you need for the job, and sometimes specialized attorneys cost a little more. However, they usually can get it done faster.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of brings us right into the third lesson learned, which it's just all about the team. I was talking to some other people about this the other day, and really it's hard to get the right team members on the bus once the crisis has happened. And so when you start with a good team, you start with a strong team where everyone has their specializations. That was the big takeaway. And one of those where we're strengthening our team is more lender connections so that we have lender fallback if something like this happens again, to where we have multiple options.
Well, the end of the story turned out well, but you went through the muck and we all got to learn from it. Thanks, Jared.
Absolutely. Thank you.
There's Jared Kavanaugh. If you want to hang out with Jared, meet him and talk real estate, coming out to the secrets of successful syndication in the new year. You'll be there, I understand?
I will.
All right, we'll see you then. It's Halloween Horror Stories, things that have gone wrong and the lessons we can all learn. Today on the Real Estate Guys radio program. Are you achieving everything you want in life? What if there was a time-tested way for you to get all you've dreamed of? The most successful people in life set goals and keep themselves accountable. But how? The good news is that it's not rocket science. You too can learn the skills and unleash the motivation that will create success in your life. And now is the time. Hi, this is Robert Helms, and I'd like to personally invite you to attend Create Your Future, the 2022 Goals Retreat, January 7th to 9th in beautiful Lake Las Vegas, Nevada. This unique weekend event has been called phenomenal, inspirational, and life-changing by the thousands of people that have attended. Hear from some of them and find out more at realestateguysradio.com under events, or call 888-489-7723, extension 18 to reserve your spot. Get your life back on track, physically, spiritually, and financially. Attend the live in-person 2022 Goals Retreat on the second weekend of the new year. Click events at realestateguysradio.com to register. This is no dress rehearsal. Live the life you were meant to. Visit realestateguysradio.com or call 888-489-7723, extension 18 today.
If you love real estate and have always wanted to own your own business, listen up. The Real Estate Guys and their panel of experts want to teach you how to go full-time fast in the real estate syndication business. These next few years may go down in history as one of the best times ever to acquire investment real estate. There are deals everywhere if you know where to look and how to assemble the resources. The Secrets of Successful Syndication seminar will show you how to make big money doing big deals from a team of experts that have syndicated projects totaling more than $1 billion. Don't wait for someone to give you a raise or create a job for you. Attend the Secrets of Successful Syndication and learn how to build a team, raise capital, find deals, and make full-time money in 6 months or less. Go to realestateguysradio.com and click on events. All the big players use syndication as a way to diversify risk, optimize profits, and earn big money. You can too. Go to realestateguysradio.com and click on events.
Welcome back to the Real Estate Guys radio program. Thanks for tuning into the show. If you want to hang out with a whole bunch of awesome folks, consider attending the highest level Real Estate Guys event there is, the 20th Annual Investor Summit. It takes place in June of 2022. You can get all the details by going to summitonsand.com. It's our annual edition of Halloween Horror Stories, investment scenarios that have gone wrong, and the great lessons we can all learn. No trivia this week, just a bunch of gunk. This next juicy morsel is called Shattering News from Afar. Well, not only is this a good one, it's from a returning Halloween horror story sharer. In fact, I think, Sep, you've been on Halloween Horror Stories more than any other investor at Sep.com. Hey.
Hey, Robert. It's good to be with you.
Well, it means you're doing a lot of deals, and I know a lot of what you do goes really well, but you also work in a really interesting niche, which is kind of the lower end, right? So tell us about this year's Halloween Horror Story.
Sure. So, property manager that I have in a market, their son also works at the property management company, and their son has a friend that needed a rental. So they put the son's friends into one of their properties. This was not one of ours. The tenant basically living in that property incurred a drive-by shooting.
Oh.
So it wasn't the tenant's fault. He just happened to be living in that house. It was managed by the same property management company that we work with. So luckily he was not hurt. So property management company knows what we do. So they thought, okay, hey, we got another property for you. Let's relocate you. So they moved the tenant into one of our houses. And everything's going fine, several months. And then tenant goes to work one day and his girlfriend is visiting from out of town. So the girlfriend is inside of one of the rooms. She's on the computer. And this is during the day. And she all of a sudden hears some fireworks. And she hears broken glass. And then she starts seeing bullets coming through the window. She ducks. And then her computer screen just explodes. And there's bullets coming through the house now.
Wow. And wish you could see this on the radio, but Sep has pictures of the scene here. That's a lot of firepower.
Yeah. So thankfully, the tenant's girlfriend was okay. There was about 17 bullets that hit the house. This is the first time we've seen something like this happen. The tenant's not a drug dealer. He's not in gangs. Neither is his girlfriend. What happened was, unfortunately, outside of our house, there was someone who was walking down the street. And a car pulled up next to that someone, and the car was, basically engaged in a drive-by shooting with that person, and that just happened to be in front of our house.
Well, that's the thing. This is actually a random occurrence.
Right.
Now, sometimes you have a property where your tenant's not a good person, and normally the vetting process, the property management company is going to have figured that out, but it happens a lot when you buy a property that's occupied or those kinds of things. So what happened next?
Yeah, so I found out about a couple hours after. I've been with this property management company for a couple years, and they have experience with this type of thing. So they manage several thousand doors. We spent a lot of time interviewing them, and they've done a fantastic job. So what they did is they immediately made sure the tenants and the tenant's girlfriend were safe, relocated them, filed the police reports, and basically getting the make-ready done on the house. So they said they got it handled. I've actually toured this house myself back in 2016. It's not what people would expect. There's not metal bars over all the windows. I mean, we've owned those before too. This is like a normal neighborhood. You see, mothers walking their little children down the street, right? But it's affordable, and this is just one of the challenges that'll happen every once in a while. So the house needs work. If we bring a property management company from Beverly Hills, we've had situations on previous horror stories, well, they would quit the moment something like this happens.
Sure. If
we bring a contractor, we've had contractors even say, Sep, we don't work in that part of town. It's not a right or wrong. It's just that's not what they do. So the contractor that we've been working with in this market works with our property manager. They've renovated 60 houses for us. And I called them and I said, hey, this just happened. You guys renovated this house and it's just got shot up. Do you guys feel comfortable doing the renovation on it? And he says, yeah, of course. And I asked him, well, do you guys need protection or security? He's like, Sep, me, my subs, we all carry. We've never had to use it, but what that means is they have a concealed carry in this particular state where they can keep handguns on them so long as they're not felons or anything like that. So they have that safety component. And I know some of the listeners might kind of raise an eyebrow like, oh, well, they shouldn't do that. But, from their perspective, they're not using that to harm people. They're using that as a defense. And they've never had to use it, but it just gives that extra layer of protection.
Well, and it's a good point because sometimes you are in a neighborhood where you either need to hire security. I know that's what you're thinking. Do I need to bring a security person on? Hey, because not only during the make ready, but there's times where the property will be open. There might be materials in the driveway, that kind of stuff. But I actually have several property managers who all regularly carry a firearm. And that's just part of the territory that it comes with. So next week, on the program, we're actually going to do a whole episode on safety. Safety as an investor, as a real estate professional, like an agent, what you can do with your apartments and so forth. Really excited about that. But let's talk about the lessons here. What are the things that you've learned this time around?
Well, this isn't the first property management company we've had in this market. What we liked about this one is just taking the experiences from the previous property management companies and making sure that it wasn't a one-man or one-woman show, and that they had a team and the systems in place to be able to handle this. The other is making sure, not just on the property management, but from the construction side of it, we're not bringing team members from outside of this market. The contractors, the subs, property managers, they've lived in this market, they're familiar with it. Actually, the contractor lived just a couple miles away from this particular property, so it's he's familiar with it. And he even told me a story. He's like, "Sup, one of the houses that we renovated for you previously, just a couple weeks ago, there was actually a shooting on that house, but it never made it to the news. And what happened was that there was 2 tenants, and the girlfriend had shot the boyfriend during an argument. He shot him in the arm." The contractor had spoken with the tenant afterwards. It was like, yeah, that sucked, but he's still alive, basically. They moved out. So it's like, it's just those types of things will happen every now and then. But statistically, it's not a very frequent occurrence. It can happen anywhere.
Sometimes you need a good shot in the arm. Hey, let's talk about this part, and that's the insurance. So was it a big enough problem to have insurance claim and working through that? And is that a covered issue?
Good question. I almost forgot that. So this is also, why Mauricio Roll, who I've met through you guys, he's the attorney that we have. And, he talks a lot about just the asset protection at the syndication seminar. So we don't own any of our properties in our own name. Everything is through LLCs. We have insurance. There's umbrella insurance. So with this, we didn't file a claim, but we always notify the insurance company. So that's another lesson, is just to be safe. If you ever have a big situation, a slip and fall, a shooting, a fire, just always give the insurance company a heads up and make sure you put that in writing. I actually had this happen on the house that I live in. We didn't file a claim either, and we notified the insurance company just very close to a certain deadline that they had. They don't tell you specifically up front, or they don't send you like a reminder. So you just have to be cognizant. You have to give them a heads up. So that way you're acting in your duty as a client. But it's not something we're going to file an insurance claim on. We just want to let them know that, hey, this happened, so that they know that there's a potential risk. And likely we're just going to go ahead and get it fixed and put it back up on the market.
These are the things that happen in real estate. Most of us will never have a tenant that gets shot at. But thanks again for another meaningful Halloween horror story. That's Sepacom. Great to have you back.
Thank you, Robert.
Let's keep the goosebumps going with the devilish delight we call, Can I Crash at Your Place? This grisly real estate tale comes from our good friend and fellow podcaster, Keith Weinhold. Hey, Keith.
Hey, Robert. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad we're together. You in the Get Rich Education Studio, me here on the road, and it is the holiday season. The holiday I'm talking about is Halloween. Most of our real estate investing goes spectacular, but every now and then there's a problem. Tell us your Halloween horror story.
An out-of-control pickup truck ran into and damaged a rental property of mine, Robert. This is a single-family rental property that I have in Florida. The pickup truck veered off the road, crashed through a fence in the yard, barreled across the yard, ran into the block wall at the rear of the home, damaging the wall and damaging all kinds of things in the back of this home, like the sliding glass door and things in the kitchen, like the cabinets and the countertops and the appliances and the flooring. And scarily, the tenants were home. They were inside the structure. Now, luckily, they were in a different part of the home. They were in a living room, and they were able to find a place to stay. The electrical transformer was hit and destroyed, and the county deemed the property, Robert, as unlivable.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Well, talk about rush hour. So these are good paying tenants. Everything's going along fine, and then smash. So what happens? Take us through how long this takes to get fixed and sorting it all out.
Yeah, well, it actually gets even worse because the date of the incident, Robert, if you can believe it, was March 12th, 2020. Now, if you think about what happened back then, that's when I think the nation really reached the height of the fear and the uncertainty around COVID. There was a travel ban to the United States from Europe. The Dow Jones fell 10% that day. But how it affected this Halloween horror story incident, Robert, is contractors didn't really feel safe working, and the county permitting office was closed. So it was not easy to get this place repaired and back on its feet again.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Timing is everything, as they say. So what happened, my friend?
The bottom line, Robert, is it took 10 agonizing months to finish the work. Now, I'm thousands of miles away from the property, so the manager is trying to handle things with the county permitting office and getting the general contractor set up and the subcontractors like electricians and so on. So it was really frustrating from my end to not have anything work with the county permitting office being closed, with people not wanting to get the work done. Yeah, it took 10 months to get this property back to being habitable and tenanted again. Now, insurance did reimburse me for this frustrating situation as far as for paying for all of the materials. Most real estate investors know that they typically have a landlord's policy, and often they're compensated for the loss of rent. Because I couldn't rent the property to anyone for 10 months, I still haven't been compensated for the loss of rent, though. The contractor that finally did the work after dragging it out for a long time still hasn't given us the documentation that we needed for this horror story and getting it remedied. A little bit of good news, though, Robert, is the outgoing tenant had paid $1,250 rent and the incoming one paid $1,350. So we did get a nice increase in rent. I also had the property refinanced shortly after it was renovated, and we got a really nice appraisal because in this 1970s home, we did have a number of those new amenities that were added in. But it was really frustrating to have this uncertainty drag on for 10 agonizing months.
Wow. Well, we all know insurance is designed to make us whole, but what happens is when you have an older property, they're going to bring it up to speed. It's going to look nice and shiny and new, both for your tenant and for the appraisal. Hey, Keith, what are the big lessons from this? Not much you can do about a random pickup truck running into your house, but what are some of the takeaways?
Yeah, there's not much you can do. So yeah, I do like to talk about lessons because lessons come from problems. Lessons don't come from successes nearly as much. I think one needs to understand that they want to be adequately insured for a property. Of course, your lien holder is going to make sure you have that. If you do happen to have a property in a high traffic area or near an intersection or something, if you're concerned about runaway traffic, there are more cost-effective options than building a wall. Those concrete pipe-looking structures that stick up maybe 4 or 5 feet from the ground that are filled with concrete, they are called bollards. That's a low-cost way to protect yourself. But it was just a completely random incident in a suburban neighborhood. But those are some things that you can do. I think mindset-wise, one needs to remember that real estate investing is a long game. I kind of think of it as a game of attrition. So this is just something to take in stride over the long term. And maybe something else I can tell people is having a property manager, professional management in that market rather than trying to manage it remotely myself. That really made things easier because I was able to lean on the property manager's economies of scale and whatever weight they could pull with trying to motivate contractors to work. If you as a real estate investor only own 5 properties in a certain market, well, you might not have a lot of influence or pull yourself, but I was basically able to leverage the economies of scale that a property manager has in 500 units and contractors really wanting to please and do good work for that property manager. So I really think that's the last lesson in how you can hedge yourself. That property manager knows the ways and means of the county permitting office and all the other procedures and how things work in that state to help mitigate this frustrating situation somewhat, Robert.
Well, some great lessons there. We appreciate you sharing and just the attitude that we expect things to go wrong when they do. Hey, we're going to deal with them. We get frustrated, but at the end of the day, real estate works. And this is living proof of that. Hey, if you want to check out Keith Weinhold, you're going to want to do that by checking out his podcast at Get Rich Education. I think it was about 7 years, almost to the month, that you launched your podcast, and super awesome stuff, my friend.
Thanks so much for having me, Robert. I love talking about it.
More Halloween horror stories when we come back. You're tuned to the Real Estate Guys radio program. I'm your host, Robert Helms. When it comes to successful rental property investing, it pays to be picky. Pick the right markets, pick profitable properties, and pick great property management. That's easier said than done, but we've got great news. Terry Kerr and his rockstar team at Mid-South Homebuyers are going strong in Memphis, Tennessee, and Little Rock, Arkansas, too. So for a top-notch turnkey single-family home rental property, whether you're a new investor or have a large portfolio already, pick Terry Kerr and Mid-South for a truly A-plus investing experience. To learn more, send an email to midsouth@realestateguysradio.com. That's midsouth@realestateguysradio.com.
If you're among the millions of people who've recently purchased a firearm, but you've never been professionally trained, this is your chance to get 4 full days of world-class professional training for free. Owning a gun is a personal choice and is a serious responsibility. We're firearms training advocates, and we believe the safest gun owners are those properly trained in the safe, responsible handling of their firearm. And if you own a gun for personal defense, a life or death situation is not the time to discover your skills under pressure are lacking. For a limited time, we're offering a 4-day defensive handgun training course at the premier firearms training school in the country, a $2,000 value for free. You pay only for your ammo and a $50 background check fee. This course has helped thousands of students go from nervous beginner to skilled marksman on par with law enforcement and military in just 4 days. To claim your free firearms training course, simply send your email request to gunsafety@realestateguysradio.com. That's gunsafety@realestateguysradio.com. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome back to the Real Estate Guys radio program. Thanks for tuning into the show. Hey, if you ever wanted to do bigger deals using other people's money, then come on out to the Secrets of Successful Syndication. It happens in March 2022. All the details at our website, realestateguysradio.com, under events. It's the 2021 edition of Halloween Horror Stories, and we're not done yet. This monstrous mess is called The Case of the Costly Partner. This next tale comes from a good friend of ours who helps people learn about apartment investing. Let's welcome to the Real Estate Guys radio program, Anthony Chara. Hey, Anthony.
Hey, Robert.
Good to see you, as always.
Good to see you, too.
I know things that normally go well, but obviously you wouldn't be on Halloween Horror Stories if that was always the case. So tell us your tale of woe.
It's a very interesting one, and it started a few years ago. As a matter of fact, the property was right here in Louisiana. It was in Shreveport. I had a partner years ago when I first started up. This was back in the mid-2000s. Who I researched him a little bit. I looked at his pedigree. He actually had a very good education. He was the vice president of a woman's accessory company for the western half of the United States. So I figured the guy's got education. He's also got experience. He owned 8 apartment buildings in Oakland, California.
Wow.
And he was selling those off, and he started buying properties down in the southeast. And we found him through a series of circumstances. He had actually bought another property that we had sold in the Shreveport, Louisiana area. And so we were talking to him about what he was doing, and he was buying this additional property, and we decided to partner with him and help him raise money to close out that particular investment. We thought it was a good marriage because of his background and the fact that he had, at the time, he seemed to have more experience than us, but what I found out a little bit later on was that the only person he listened to really was himself. So that was a problem. He wouldn't take any feedback from anybody else regarding what was going on and how to improve the property. And so one of the things that started with me looking at the records that he was providing on a weekly basis, an occupancy report. And what he was concentrating on was the physical occupancy of the property to start with.
Different than the economic occupancy.
Very different, because you can't pay bills with the physical occupancy. You can only pay the bills with the economic occupancy. So I'm talking to him about this and saying, look, we're looking at the wrong place. It doesn't have 6 or 7 or 8% vacancy. It's more like 12 or 13% vacancy. And he's like, oh, no, it'll be okay. It'll be fine. You're looking at the wrong numbers. We've got plenty of occupancy. We kept going back and forth on that. And he also wouldn't listen to any suggestions. So I used to go down with some of my students and do property tours on different properties so they could learn from not only looking at the property on a computer screen, but actually seeing it personally.
Awesome.
Talking directly to property managers to find out how they operate the property on a daily basis, how they do collections, how they do evictions. And then we also drive around the neighborhood to find out what's going on in the neighborhood.
Yep.
What are the types of buildings in the area? How well are they maintained? So on and so forth. Well, as I was going down and doing these property tours, I was noticing that the property just didn't seem to be taken care of. There was buildings that needed to be painted. You could see where the paint was kind of coming off certain areas. And it's one of those things where I talked to him and said, look, we need to get up there. Somebody needs to scrape it, prime it, paint it, because it's not looking very good. And we also had another issue with the roofs, because we had before we bought the property, there were some very large trees. They're still there, but the branches were overgrown, so a lot of the branches were rubbing on the asphalt shingles and wearing out the shingles. So somebody was obviously getting up there and making the repairs. The problem was when you looked at the building, you could actually see light green, dark green, and medium green shingles. So the roofs didn't look all that great. So the curb appeal for the property was suffering. I'm trying to get him to take care of it, to come up with a replacement plan where we could go through and do one roof every 6 months, maybe one roof every 4 months.
Yep.
Right? So you're not really digging into cash flow, but it's something that needed to be done, and paint the buildings.
Yeah.
And his common response was, oh no, we can't, we're not going to do that because we don't have the money. We need to make payments to our investors to keep our investors happy. And what I learned in hindsight was it's better to keep the renters happy, the residents happy, because if you keep the residents happy, what are they going to do?
They're going to bring more people. They're going to pay on time. They're going to appreciate it.
Exactly. So, well, his focus was on keeping the investors happy. So he'd tell me that we don't have enough money, and then a week later, he'd do a distribution to our investors. It's like, well, but we did have the money. So, well, no, we didn't. We had to do a distribution. It's like, okay, this isn't working here because the property's going downhill. We need to take care of it.
So what happens next?
Fast forward 3 years, and the book. We also had some issues with the bookkeeper that the property manager was using. I was trying to get him to change the property manager because she was also very stuck in her way. I made some suggestions on things like doing something called a payday lease, and she was not open to that. She was not open to different ways of screening the residents. She just basically, her philosophy was, well, it's a C-class property and you're just going to get people in here that just don't pay.
Right.
I was like, well, that may be true, but there's a difference between 5 people that aren't paying in a 150-unit property and 30 people that aren't paying in a 150-unit property.
Yeah.
So one of the other things that I was looking at were the books. We were getting Excel reports every month, the profit and loss statement. And one of the things I noticed is I was going in and adding in a formula to show my investors the operating ratio, how much of the money that from the income was going to pay the operating expenses. So one of the things that I noticed was the numbers on the profit and loss statement kept changing back several months.
In the past?
In the past.
Okay.
Right. So I'm looking at that going, wait a second. This just doesn't look right. They're basically going back, and somebody's going back for some reason and manipulating the numbers. And of course, they weren't getting better, they were getting worse, which meant they were adding more things to the expense categories. Yeah. It's like, okay, something's going on here. So I was trying to talk to my partner about replacing, if not the manager, then get the manager to replace the bookkeeper, because something was not right. He wouldn't do it. He had a loyalty to the manager, didn't want to replace either of them. Well, again, fast forward 3 years, and then what happens is the manager ends up getting sick, and she basically vanishes. He has no idea where she is. He's assuming she's in the hospital, can't reach her. Well, obviously, you can't have a property run without somebody steering the ship.
That's for sure.
So he hired a new manager that we had been using on a lot of other properties, was extremely good. He comes in and says, guys, I hate to tell you this, but you don't have 10% vacancy. You actually have closer to 40% vacancy.
Wow.
And we're not going to make payroll. You have a whole bunch of units that have been abandoned. Nobody's even in them. Not only that, but because of the high vacancy, people are now breaking windows, they're going in, stealing appliances, and it's like, this is a mess. Well, they end up missing a mortgage payment. They miss a mortgage payment, the bank doesn't really like that.
Right.
So the bank sends out one of their inspectors, they start walking the property. We went from missing about a $15,000 payment to the bank telling us that now we had to paint all of the buildings, and when we originally looked at the painting, it was going to be something like $80,000 to $85,000 estimate. Well, now we have to get estimates because the bank says they want the whole thing painted.
Yep.
Instead of $80,000 to $83,000, now that the wood that I was trying to get him to replace or not replace, but paint and protect years ago, it now got to the point where it was rotted and had to be completely replaced.
Wow.
So the bill went from $83,000 to about $220,000. The roofs, which we could have done piece by piece because we had enough maintenance guys.
The plan you talked about before, yeah.
Yeah, they could have gotten up on the roof and done the shingles themselves. Well, now the bank doesn't say you can do one here or there. They just want everything done. That was another $500,000 estimate to have all the roofs done. So we went from missing a $15,000 payment to having to do the roofs and all the painting, plus the penalty interest and late fees and everything else. And all of a sudden we're at $750,000.
So how do you bridge that gap?
We didn't.
Yeah.
So the one good thing about my partner, he's very good with coming up with plans. He went to the bank and said, look, here's a complete written plan of what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. But in order to get there, we need your help. We need a loan modification or something like that. Unfortunately, the bank said, you know what? It's a government insured loan. I believe it was a Fannie Mae loan. And because it's insured, we don't care if you pay or not. If you pay, great. If you take care of the property, fantastic. But if you don't, we'll just get our money from the government.
Wow.
So the whole thing pretty much went in the toilet. And it just didn't work out well. We ended up losing the property. Fortunately, because of the first 4 years of operation, the investors probably got about half of their money back through distributions. But beyond that, they ended up losing the property. And worst part of this scenario is 6 months later, I get an email on my computer, and I look at the picture, and I was like, wow, that picture of that property looks awfully familiar. It turned out to be our picture, our marketing picture for our property in Shreveport. And it was put out by a real estate company who was putting the property up for auction. So this property that we had bought for about $3.4 million, the opening auction bid was $400,000.
Wow.
To buy this 140 unit property in Shreveport. It's like, oh man, this is just nuts. So what did I learn from all this?
Yeah,
What's the
that's the big
takeaway?
question.
I learned a couple things. So first off, I learned I need to do a better job of vetting the people that I was going to be doing business with. Not just people who had a great pedigree, but maybe having a conversation with them and saying something like this, like, hey, if this happened, how would you handle the situation? What's your philosophy on maintaining the property as opposed to doing distributions?
Right.
If you had the choice between putting on a new roof or painting the property to make it look nicer, or keeping your investors happy and making a distribution, what would you do? If I have a suggestion on, or if there's issues with the bookkeeping or the numbers are changing, would that be a concern to you? Just get a little bit more into it. He obviously knew what he was doing from an ownership standpoint because he had 8 complexes out in Oakland, California. He had a great college education, but when it came to actually running the day-to-day operations, he kind of fell on that part, and he wouldn't let anybody else step in either. He just left it up to the manager. He supposedly trusted the managers, and I get that, right? This is supposed to be an investment. You shouldn't have to worry about the day-to-day operations, but somebody still has to oversee those things and look at the numbers, and they have to be open to listening to their partners and their investors. You know, if things aren't going well and your partners and your investors aren't happy, a lot of the time all you got from him was pushback, as opposed to, okay, well, tell me more. What do you think we should do? And then take action based on that information and the input that he was getting from other people.
Yeah, well, it is a great lesson. It's made you a stronger and better investor, obviously. So thanks for sharing that. Anthony actually helps lots of folks figure out the apartment investing game, and you can find out more at successclasses.com. Anthony, thanks for sharing with us today.
Thanks, Robert. It's
Good
my
stuff.
pleasure.
Our final creepy caution is entitled Rebranding Shot Down. This next story comes from a returning Halloween horror story provider. Let's say hello to our good friend, Michael Manthe. Hey, Michael.
Hey, Robert. I'm not sure if that's a good thing that this is returning, but here we are.
Here we are. Well, most things go well. You've been in property management, real estate investment, syndication for a long time, but every now and then something goes wrong. Tell us what happened.
So for this particular story, we bought a 783-unit apartment complex. And the previous owner, so normally, the best deals in real estate are owner operated. Usually at that scale, they don't try owner operated.
Right.
This guy did. So 50% occupied asset, buy it, we're implementing, the takeover. It was heavy value add. The staff is on site. They hear a commotion in an apartment, call the police. The guy comes out shoots the cop up.
Oh.
He gets away in the mayhem. The cops come. They are looking for him. The property manager has the set of master keys. A couple of the locks stick a little bit. The cops get nervous. He's on the other side, going to come out shooting again. So they get the battering ram and start smashing through the place looking for him.
Nice.
They did find him. Nobody else got hurt. The cop did survive that got shot. But as far as for the property, we had just rebranded. So when the local news station got there and is talking about the shooting on this property, there in the background is our fancy new sign, life is better at this apartment complex. So that was not quite what we were looking to have happen there, or that's not the report that we really wanted to send to investors.
So in the aftermath of this, because stuff happens and tenants do weird stuff, what did you have to do just to, assuage your tenants and PR and all that?
Yeah. So one is, we're rebranding again. That, obviously takes time. But right away, the staff was just there for tenants, listened. We have a security fence coming up, to put around the whole building. We're putting $10 million into this asset. So it's going to be beautiful, but it's definitely, just after takeover, still in process. So up the security and continued to move forward on the security fence. But thankfully, it's not something that happens, it's not a regular occurrence. It was a one-time thing there.
Now, and this was a tenant that the previous management had put in.
Yeah, and they were not good at checking. There was its own ecosystem happening on, a huge asset, almost 800 units, 50% occupied. So that left a lot of room for, other nefarious activity to be there. But hey, that's why we got it for the value that we did. And it's positioned very exciting for where we're going to take it.
Now, what are the big lessons here? What are the things that you learned that maybe make you a stronger investor going forward?
So the big thing is strength of the team. For a lot of people that would freak them out or get you all concerned or worried. But when you have a strong team and they're experienced and they know not just enough to be okay with moving through that sort of a challenge, but knowing how to take an asset from one level to the next. So, repainting everything, security fence with key cards, access throughout the whole thing, security cameras up everywhere. So, seeing what's on property now, but also having the vision and the skill to bring it through a strategy into something successful.
We buy something like this that's already existing. There's already management. There's an owner in place. And we look at the rent roll and we assume there's probably, some physical rent that is an economic rent. And that's just part of the process. You've got it in your plan to do this work, improve it, get the rents up. But you don't know the liability of the tenants. In this case, nearly 400 tenants there that you didn't vet, the other group did, and yet you're not just going to dump 400 tenants. So this is a tough situation when you inherit somebody else's mistake.
Yep. And you have to move forward with it. So
now talk about this part, Michael, because this is interesting to me. Obviously, the property's on the news and the neighbors instantly know, and it's got this stigma. How do you coach those tenants that, hey, we have this plan, it's going to be better, so they don't all just scatter?
So the interesting thing was, as management is checking in with tenants, they're hearing feedback from tenants. The tenants themselves have a certain pride of where they live. And it's not every tenant that's there is horrible. So we were actually surprised and glad that there was tenants sticking up for the complex and saying, hey, it isn't this bad, or we love it here. So they've been super receptive and grateful to now have a management team that's responding to them, getting things fixed, getting the place cleaned up, infusing huge amount of capital into it. So they've been very supportive. And, we're right there with us, wanting the property to be improved.
All right. Well, great stuff. Thanks for sharing with us. Before I let you out of here, you've got an event coming up next year, and I'm excited to be back with your group. Tell us about that for folks that live in the Northeast.
I'm so excited you're coming back. We've had a number of these events in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and the feedback from them has been really powerful. So July 8th and 9th in Lancaster, PA, we will have an Elevate Investing event. You and a lot of other awesome speakers will be there, and would love to have the like-minded folks and high-quality folks that I recognize right away coming to your events that you guys attract. Would love if any of them want to join us.
Awesome. Well, it's going to be a great time. You'll hear more about it as we get closer. Thanks, Michael, for sharing your Halloween horror story.
My pleasure.
Oh, my goodness. There it is. Another edition of Halloween Horror Stories, dread, terror, and some awesome lessons.
Absolutely. And we love to get these things right out of the real world, just like Ask the Guys. So if you have a Halloween horror story, get it to us and Ask the Guys. And who knows, just like in the Ask the Guys, we might put your question on the air. we might put your Halloween horror story on the air. So this is your chance. If you've got a real world lesson where you can tell us what happened, what you learned, and how it came out to the benefit of other listeners, please share that with us. Just go to Ask the Guys at realestateguysradio.com and let us know.
It's funny. We actually saw some of the pictures of these. This started out of our investor mentoring club, which we used to run once a month, and every October we would do Halloween horror stories. All the original ones were ours, right? Here was the problem, here's the issue. But what happened is people started to recognize, wait a minute, there is power in the negative. There is, if I can go learn and get the lesson, I'm a better investor for it. And it turns people around. And we would take that 3-hour live workshop, and then you and I would basically recap it on the air. Today, I think it's much better when we hear it right from the horse's mouth.
Oh, absolutely. Because you get a chance to do a great job, Robert, as you do, asking those clarifying questions, drawing out the nuances. And, when you're hearing it from somebody, it's not just the story that you hear, but you hear the emotion, you hear the tonality, you can kind of read their body language through the audio, if you will. In other words, you just have to understand that dealing with hardship is definitely an emotional situation. And the more you have a chance to be around people and experience the fact there's nothing wrong with you because things went wrong. Right. Sometimes it's you made a mistake, and people make mistakes, and you're going to get the lesson. Sometimes things happen that are completely outside your control, right? You can't control if the borders are going to close for 8 months. That happened to us in an offshore development. You can't control if there's going to be a fire or a natural disaster. Some of these things just kind of happen, and you have to respond to them. Some of the mayhem that occurs in certain neighborhoods from time to time. We have a good friend that, has had shootings in his property and so on. And so, the list goes on and on and on. The fact is there's nothing wrong with you when those things happen. It's not what happens to you that dictates how successful you are. It's really how you choose to respond and react, and the good decisions you make, making the best of whatever the situation you get handed is.
Big thanks to all our friends who shared their Halloween horror stories today. Speaking of absolutely horrifying, can you imagine if you didn't get signed up for the Investor Summit and all the spots were sold out? We are well over 70% sold out for the 20th annual Investor Summit on Sand. So quickly, get your spot reserved. Just go to realestateguysradio.com under the button that says Summit. Next week, we've got an awesome show on a really different topic. We're going to talk about safety surrounding real estate. And we've got 3 incredible guests. Until then, have a happy Halloween and go make some equity happen.
This episode of the Real Estate Guys radio show is brought to you by Paradigm Life. Powerful cash management strategies using life insurance. Learn more at beyourbank.com. Mid-South Home Buyers. Low-cost, turnkey cash flow properties in Memphis, Tennessee. Corporate Direct. Asset protection strategies for real estate investors from attorney and rich dad advisor Garrett Sutton. Find these and other great companies under the Resources tab at realestateguysradio.com. To learn how you can expose your product or service to the Real Estate Guys audience, call 888-489-7723 extension 4. That's 888-489-7723 extension 4. Or use the feedback page at realestateguysradio.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week right here on the Real Estate Guys Radio Show.